My daughter took my country house and gave it to her husband's family. She said, "It's theirs now. You have no rights to go there." I just nodded and smiled. When they arrived to move in, they were shocked at what they saw. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to John Paul from New York. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I've never been a sentimental man. Not in the way people think when they hear that word. I don't cry at weddings, I don't keep old birthday cards, and I've never been one to say, "I love you," without fumbling over the syllables. But the country house? That was different. I built that house myself when I was 32, with nothing but second-hand lumber, sweat from my brow, and dreams too big for the little rental we lived in back then. My wife, Helen, picked the wallpaper in every room. I laid the hardwood floors with my own hands. And Elise, our only daughter, was born in that house, right there in the upstairs master, because we couldn't get to the hospital in time during the blizzard of '89. That house wasn't just wood and brick. It was a heartbeat. My heartbeat. My family's. When Helen died a decade ago, that house became even more sacred to me. I spent 3 full months after her funeral restoring the front porch, replacing every window screen, repainting the trim just the way she liked it, robin's egg blue. I told myself it was upkeep, but it was grief, plain and simple. I thought, in time, Elise would come to understand what the house meant, that she'd treat it as a place of memory, not a property to exploit. I was wrong. Or maybe I was just hoping against hope that the little girl who used to chase fireflies in the backyard was still somewhere inside the woman who now strutted around in stilettos and designer sunglasses, married to a man who looked at me like a maintenance worker. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Sunday. Elise had invited me to brunch at a trendy spot in the city. I should have known something was up when she made the reservation. She doesn't usually make time for me unless she needs something. We sat across from each other at a marble table, her mimosa untouched, mine long gone. She smiled that tight, corporate smile of hers, leaned in like she was about to tell me a secret, and said, "Dad, I've decided to give the country house to Jared's parents. They'll be moving in next month. It makes sense. They're retired, they'll take good care of it, and honestly, you don't really go there anymore." I blinked. Once. Twice. The world didn't slow down, but something inside me did. I remember thinking, so this is the moment. The moment I find out I no longer matter. That everything I worked for has become a favor she thinks she's allowed to hand out. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I just nodded, smiled, let her think she'd won. And that small, silent gesture? It rattled her more than any protest ever could. She paused, searching my face. "You're okay with that, right?" I sipped my coffee, looked her square in the eyes, and said, "Sure. If that's what you've decided." That was all I gave her. On the drive back home, I rolled the windows down just to feel something: wind, dust, pain. Anything but this dull numbness growing in my chest. Elise didn't ask. She told. That house wasn't hers to give, and she damn well knew it. But she'd said it anyway, with the kind of entitlement that doesn't get born overnight. No, it's raised. Federal coddled. And I had no one to blame for that, but myself. I gave her everything after her mother passed. Let her grieve on her terms. Paid for college, for her wedding, even the down payment on her starter home. All with the quiet hope that someday, she'd look back and see what I'd done and honor it. Instead, she bartered away the one place where my memories still lived. That night, I called Mike, my oldest friend, my old crew foreman back from our contracting days. Mike was blunt in that way only real friends can be. "You knew she was going to pull something like this eventually," he said. "You let her think everything's hers for the taking." He wasn't wrong. Elise had always been the kind of kid who mistook silence for permission. And I'd been silent for far too long. But here's what Elise didn't know, and what I didn't bother to tell her over Eggs Benedict and arrogance. The house wasn't hers to give because it wasn't even mine anymore. I'd sold it 2 months ago. Quietly. Carefully. I'd found a buyer who knew the value of that house not just in dollars, but in dignity. The Larsons. A couple from the same town, actually. Ironic twist of fate? Maybe. The Larsons were the parents of Elise's ex-best friend, Natalie, the one she stabbed in the back during a business deal gone sour. Lawsuits, public fallouts. The whole mess had made Elise persona non grata in half the social circles she once dominated. So yes, I sold the house to people I trusted, people I knew would honor it, and maybe, just maybe, people whose presence would send a clear message. I hadn't done it to hurt her. That's the part people never understand. I did it because I was tired. Tired of being seen as a stepping stone. Tired of the way she looked at me like I was some relic she had to tolerate until my usefulness ran out. The country house was the last piece of myself I had control over. And I wasn't going to let her strip it from me like some power move at a board meeting. No, not this time. As I sat on my porch that evening, the sun dipping behind the trees, casting long shadows across the lawn, I thought about Helen. I imagined what she'd say if she saw all this unfold. Maybe she'd scold me for not confronting Elise sooner. Or maybe she'd just squeeze my hand and whisper, "You did the right thing." Either way, I felt her in the breeze, in the creak of the porch swing, in the silence that followed. I didn't know exactly how Elise would react when the truth came out, but I knew one thing for sure. I'd stopped smiling to keep the peace. This time, I smiled because I'd reclaimed it. There's something cruel about the way time repackages our sacrifices. You work with your hands, blister them year after year, tell yourself the aches are worth it, and then one day, the very person you sacrificed for looks at it all like a transaction. Not a legacy, just a deed. A name on paper. That's how Elise had come to see the country house. Not as the place where I taught her to ride a bike, where we sat on the roof during meteor showers, or where Helen made soup from scratch even when she was too tired to stand. To her, it was just leverage, a bargaining chip to curry favor with her husband's family. And that hurt worse than the arthritis now creeping into my fingers. The truth was, I had known this moment would come for years. It didn't arrive overnight. Elise had been changing since college, maybe even before. I remember visiting her during her sophomore year, bringing a care package Helen had prepared before she passed, only to find her laughing at how country the snacks were. "You didn't have to bring pickled beans, Dad. My friends think that stuff is weird." That was the first time I saw it, that little flinch of shame behind her smile. She wasn't embarrassed of the snacks. She was embarrassed of where she came from. Of me. Still, I tried. I kept showing up. I helped her move into her first apartment, paid her car insurance until she landed her first job, listened when she called me sobbing after her first big breakup. I kept giving, thinking one day she'd turn around and say, "Thanks, Dad." I see it now. But gratitude never came. Just more requests, more assumptions. And I, like a fool, kept meeting them. Because that's what parents do, right? We give, until we don't have anything left but regret. It was Mike who finally snapped me out of it. He stopped by one afternoon, uninvited, as always, with a six-pack and a face full of opinions. "She's not a little girl anymore, Walt," he said, settling onto my porch swing with a grunt. "She's a grown woman who's figured out how to manipulate you without even asking. That ain't love. That's entitlement." I didn't argue. Because he was right. I'd known it. I just hadn't wanted to name it out loud. That conversation with Mike was what finally pushed me to follow through with the sale. I'd been dragging my feet, unsure if I was ready to let the house go. Even after Elise started tossing around phrases like, "When we move in, and Jared's parents love the view," I still held on. But after brunch, after those cold, smug words left her lips, "It's theirs now. You have no rights to go back," I knew what had to be done. I called the Larsons that night. The Larsons weren't strangers. Natalie, their daughter, had grown up like a second child to us. She and Elise were inseparable from kindergarten through their 20s, until Elise stabbed her in the back over a business merger. Elise had leveraged private info and Natalie had confided during a retreat to undercut her in a major pitch. It turned into a PR nightmare. Friendships ended. Lawsuits flew. Elise came out on top professionally, but burned every bridge she'd ever crossed, including the one with me. I never said it to her face, but it was the first time I truly didn't recognize my daughter. Selling the house to the Larsons wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about trust. About putting the home in hands that would cherish it, not treat it like a trophy. Steve Larson was a retired electrician. His wife, Janine, taught art at the local elementary school. They walked the property with reverence, pausing at every corner like they could feel the history in the walls. Janine teared up in the living room. "This feels like home," she whispered. And I knew, without a doubt, it was the right decision. The process was clean, quick. I handled everything through a private broker to keep it quiet. We closed within 6 weeks. I even offered to cover a portion of the closing costs just to move it along. The locks were changed, the deed transferred, and the Larsons moved in early, well before Elise's imagined timeline. I didn't tell her, didn't know her that. She made her move. I made mine. The difference? Mine had roots. A week after the sale finalized, I drove out there one last time. The road leading up to the house still felt familiar, every turn muscle memory. I parked by the lake, walked the old dock Helen and I built, and sat down on the bench where we used to drink coffee at sunrise. The Larsons weren't home yet. The house looked quiet. Still, but not empty. Not anymore. I closed my eyes and let the memories wash over me. The sound of Elise giggling as Helen chased her through the garden, the creak of the swing set I'd built during a late summer heatwave, the scent of fresh basil from Helen's herb planters. I thought I'd cry, but I didn't. I felt clean, like something heavy had finally been set down after years of carrying it alone. Driving away, I felt the strangest thing. Not grief, not guilt, but clarity. Elise thought she could give away what was never hers. Thought my silence meant surrender. But what she didn't realize, and what she still doesn't, at least not yet, is that her mistake wasn't just in assuming control. It was in underestimating the man who built the damn place from the ground up. Let her bring the champagne and cameras. Let Jared's parents puff out their chests and act like they've conquered something. I won't be there to see it, but they will. And when they do, well, they'll learn just how fast a legacy turns into a lesson. The sun was just starting to melt over the hills when I got the call. I was sitting on my back porch, nursing the last of a lukewarm coffee and watching a couple of birds argue over a spot on the feeder. My phone buzzed once. I saw Elise's name flash across the screen, ignored it. It buzzed again. Then a third time. Finally, a fourth, this one with a text attached. "Why is there someone in our house? Call me. Now." I didn't move. Not right away. I just stared at that message like it had come from a stranger. Our house. 2 words, 9 letters, and enough entitlement to knock the wind out of you. I took one last sip of my coffee, leaned back in my chair, and let the wind carry the silence. I already knew what had happened. I'd seen the forecast weeks ago, watched the clouds roll in. And now the storm had arrived, right on schedule. The Larsons had moved in the night before, 2 days earlier than planned. They'd wanted time to settle quietly before the big transition. We'd agreed I wouldn't be there. No grand farewell. No awkward handoff. Just a clean break. I told them Elise still believed the house was hers to give, and they promised to stay calm if she ever showed up. But I also installed new locks, changed the gate code, and hired a local security team just in case. Not out of paranoia, out of experience. People do foolish things when their imagined power gets ripped away. And Elise? She built an entire identity around the illusion that everything I had was simply waiting to be handed over. She called again. I picked up this time, just to get it over with. "What's going on?" Her voice was high-pitched, strained, and sharp enough to slice through drywall. "There are people inside. Jared's parents are sitting in the driveway like idiots, and there's a guard, an actual security guy, telling us to leave." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't match her panic. I just said, "That's because the house isn't yours. Or theirs. I sold it." For a moment, silence. Just breathing, hers rapid, mine steady. Then she exploded. "You what? When? You didn't even, are you kidding me right now? You didn't tell me? You just sold it? To who?" "You don't get to be outraged," I said quietly. "You told me it wasn't mine anymore. You said, and I quote, 'You have no rights to go back.' You made your decision. I made mine." In the background, I could hear raised voices. Her husband. His mother. A lot of shuffling, someone swearing. Elise's tone turned desperate. "This is insane. They're telling us to leave. Jared's mom is freaking out. Dad, you embarrassed us." That was the moment. Right there. Not "you hurt me." Not "I'm sorry." Not "I was wrong." No. Just, "You embarrassed us." I closed my eyes and smiled, small, sad, and satisfying all at once. "This isn't about embarrassment, Elise. This is about boundaries. Something you've never respected. She sputtered. You blindsided me. This is going to ruin everything. Jared's parents were going to move in next week. We told everyone. They brought photographers. Then I suggest you tell them the truth, I said. That you promised them something you never owned. She hung up. The next morning, Mike showed up with the newspaper and a grin so wide it barely fit on his face. Heard your daughter caused a scene out on Sawyer Hill, he said, handing me the local press. Page 6. Security standoff at Sawyer Lake property. Mistaken owners turned away by new residents. I didn't laugh, but I didn't feel sorry either. Mike sat across from me, cracking open a soda. You know, Walt, I've seen you build houses out of nothing. I've seen you patch roofs with duct tape and prayer. But I ain't never seen you build a boundary like that. He slapped my knee. Proud of you, old man. I didn't say much. Just nodded. Let the moment settle. Later that week, I got a voicemail from Elise. Not a call, just a recording. Her voice was lower, the heat gone, but not the venom. I can't believe you'd do this to me. You made me look like a liar. Jared's parents think I tricked them. I don't even know what to say to them. You humiliated us. I replayed that message twice. Not once did she ask how I was doing. Not once did she acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, she'd crossed the line. It wasn't about me. It was about how she looked. How her fragile little power play had collapsed in front of the very people she tried to impress. And still, I felt a flicker of pity. Not for her. For the girl she used to be, the one who used to curl up beside Helen on the porch swing and ask for another bedtime story. That little girl wouldn't have done this. She would have known better. But that girl was gone. So I deleted the voicemail. I poured myself a whiskey. And I toasted, not to revenge, but to resolve. To finally choosing myself. The Larsons later told me Jared's mother tried to bluff her way past the security guard, claimed to have documents, called the sheriff, made a full production out of it. But the papers were clear. The deed was real. And no amount of tantrums or name-dropping could undo what was already done. The Locks didn't recognize her. The land didn't either. And neither did I. I knew she'd come eventually. Elise was never the type to let things go unanswered. Humiliation didn't sit well with her. It clung like wet silk, suffocating her pride until she wrung it out on someone else. I expected yelling. I expected insults. What I didn't expect was how quiet her car was when it pulled into my driveway. No tires screeching. No doors slamming. Just a quiet engine, a long pause, and the hesitant click of heels on concrete. I didn't get up right away. I just sat there on the porch with my coffee, pretending not to notice her standing 10 feet away, arms folded, rage barely masked behind an icy smile. You sold it to them, she said finally. There it was. Not a greeting. Not an apology. Just the accusation. The venom laced in that one word, them, was unmistakable. I took a sip before answering. I sold it to people who respect what it is. Elise stepped forward, her eyes wide with disbelief. To the Larsons? After everything Natalie did? You picked them over me. I set my mug down carefully on the table beside me, as if steadiness could protect me from the weight of her fury. No, I said calmly. I picked them over the version of you that thought she could give away something she never earned. She recoiled like I'd slapped her, blinking rapidly. You're my father. You're supposed to be on my side. I let that hang in the air, heavy and sour. Being your father doesn't mean endorsing every selfish thing you do. Elise's voice cracked. I did this for the family. For Jared's parents. They needed a place. No. I interrupted, rising to my feet slowly. You did it for status. For appearances. You gave away my house to buy favor with people who couldn't care less about who built it or what it meant. She turned away then, arms crossed tight over her chest, and for a moment, the fight drained from her shoulders. You made me look like a fool, she muttered. I walked down the porch steps until I stood beside her. You did that all by yourself. She wheeled around, red-faced. I'm your daughter, she snapped. And you sold our family home to people you know I can't stand. I didn't flinch. You gave away my home like I was already dead. The words landed like a hammer. Her mouth opened, then shut. She stumbled back half a step, arms dropping to her sides. For once, there was nothing to say. She looked smaller suddenly, like the little girl who used to sneak cookies before dinner and blame the dog. We stood there in silence until she finally asked, Why didn't you just tell me? Because you wouldn't have heard it, I said. You don't listen when the answer isn't what you want. She swiped at her eyes then, angry at the tears more than at me. Do you even care what this did to me? To my marriage? I didn't answer right away. I wanted to. I wanted to reach into that wound and offer something soft. But I couldn't lie, not to her, and not to myself. I care that it had to come to this, I said slowly. But I don't regret it. A car pulled up then, Mike's truck. He stepped out, looked between us, and raised an eyebrow like he'd walked in on something he'd been expecting all along. He didn't say a word, just leaned against his door, arms crossed, waiting. Elise noticed him and bristled. Oh, great. Your sidekick's here to gloat. Mike gave her a tired look. I'm here to make sure Walt doesn't end up on the 6 o'clock news, he said. You look like you're 2 seconds from throwing a flower pot. She turned to me, jaw clenched. This isn't over. I shook my head. Yes, Elise. It is. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you might start figuring out how to fix what's still yours. Her face twisted with something between sorrow and disgust. You think this makes you some kind of hero? No, I said. Just a man who finally said no. She didn't say goodbye. She just stormed off, heels cracking like gunfire on the pavement. Her car peeled out seconds later, and then it was quiet again, too quiet. Mike walked up beside me and let out a long whistle. Well, he said, that went better than I expected. I didn't laugh. I couldn't. Not yet. I don't feel good about it, I admitted. He nodded. You weren't supposed to. It ain't about feeling good. It's about feeling right. I stared down the street where her car had disappeared. Part of me wanted to run after her. The other part, the part that had been steamrolled for years, stayed rooted. Think she'll come around? I asked. Mike shrugged. Maybe. Maybe not. But at least now she knows where the line is. That night, I sat alone on the porch and replayed every word. Not to second-guess myself. Just to let the weight of it settle. I thought about the years I'd swallowed my voice. The times I'd said yes when I meant no. The way I'd twisted myself into a shape that made room for her ego. No more. She wasn't a child anymore. And I wasn't her doormat. The first message came 2 days after Elise's driveway meltdown. I was folding laundry, something Helen always did with precise, meditative care, when my phone lit up with a ping from our extended family group chat. The thread had been mostly dormant since Christmas, a place where people shared baby pictures and casserole recipes, the digital equivalent of small talk. But that morning, someone had unearthed it like a shovel to dry earth. Cousin Linda. Elise said you sold the house out from under her? What happened, Uncle Walt? I stared at the screen, not typing back right away. Another ping followed, then another. Suddenly, it was like every cousin, niece, and in-law had decided to turn my family boundary into a group-wide referendum. Tommy, Elise's cousin, man, that's cold. Family's supposed to look out for each other. And Clara, that was your wife's house too, Walt. Thought you'd want to keep it in the family. Each word landed like a tap from a gavel. Judgments wrapped in politeness. Veiled scoldings. I scrolled for a while, watching the sanctimony pile up, each person projecting their own version of the story without ever asking me what happened. Because Elise got to them first. Of course she did. She was always quick to the narrative, always ahead of the truth. I didn't write a novel in response. Just a few lines. I built that house with my own hands. I paid the mortgage, laid the foundation, and watched my wife die on that porch. Elise told me it was no longer mine. So I sold it. To people who would respect it. That's the whole story. Then I attached a photo of the deed transfer, legally signed and notarized months before her so-called gift. For a few minutes, the thread went silent. Then came the trickle of quiet, private texts. Aunt Clara, I didn't know she said that to you. I'm sorry. Linda, that changes things. I'm sorry too. But the one that stuck out came from Tommy. Tommy, still think you should have talked to her first. Doesn't matter what she said. You're her dad. That was the one I reread 3 times. Not because it stung, but because it encapsulated everything wrong with how we're conditioned as parents, especially as fathers. Doesn't matter what she said. Doesn't matter how she humiliated me, how she weaponized my silence. What mattered was that I was the parent, and parents are supposed to absorb the blow. I put the phone down and walked out to the porch. Mike was there, like he always seemed to be lately, picking at the label of a beer bottle with the patience of a monk. You see the fireworks? He asked. Yeah, I said. Cousins came out swinging. He chuckled. Let me guess. You're the dad. You should have taken the high road. I nodded. Like I haven't been doing that for 20 years. He leaned back in his chair and stretched. Funny how nobody asks why she thought it was okay to give away something she didn't own. I thought about that as the sun dipped behind the houses. How quickly people expect a father's sacrifice to be infinite. How easily boundaries get recast as betrayal when they disrupt someone else's comfort. That night, I got a call from Janine Larson. Walt, she said, her voice soft and deliberate, I just wanted to thank you again. Steve and I are truly honored. We already started fixing up the attic. Found a bunch of old tools, beautiful stuff. You left them for us? Those belong to Helen's father, I said. She always wanted them to stay with the house. Janine was quiet for a beat. We'll take care of it, I promise. After we hung up, I lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above me. Elise hadn't reached out again. I imagined her walking around her home in silence, her husband brooding, her in-laws grumbling about wasted money and broken promises. Maybe she was angry. Maybe she was ashamed. But she hadn't said a word. No apology. No explanation. Just silence. I should have felt vindicated. I'd drawn my line, enforced my boundary. But what I felt, more than anything, was a kind of mourning. Not for the house. I'd already grieved that. No, I mourned the illusion I'd carried for years. The idea that someday, Elise would turn back into the girl who used to pick wildflowers and leave them on her mother's nightstand. That version of her didn't exist anymore, and maybe hadn't for a long time. The next morning, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No return address, just my name in Elise's handwriting. Inside was a single printed photo. The house, in springtime, wildflowers blooming, Helen in the garden with Elise as a toddler, both of them laughing. On the back, in small script, it read, I remember too. No apology, no request, just memory. I stood there for a long time, holding that photo like it might break. And maybe that was her redemptive gesture. Not reconciliation, not surrender, but recognition. A crack in the pride, a moment of grace. I didn't need more than that. Not now. I'd already made peace with my choice. But I took the photo inside and put it on the fridge anyway. The house was gone, the fight was over, and the quiet had settled in like dust on an unused shelf. I woke up earlier these days. Not because I had anywhere to be, but because I liked the silence before the world woke up and asked for things. There was something sacred about sitting in that stillness with nothing but the tick of the kitchen clock and the hum of the refrigerator. I used to dread mornings after Helen passed, used to reach across the bed hoping to feel her arm and instead touching cold sheets. But now, I just breathed. In, out, letting each inhale remind me I was still here, still standing. Elise hadn't called. Not since the photo. No texts, no voicemails. Just that quiet acknowledgement tucked into my mailbox like an olive branch carved out of memory. And honestly, I didn't expect anything more. That photo said what she couldn't, or maybe what she wouldn't. Either way, I'd stopped holding my breath waiting for the girl she used to be to come walking through the door with some grand apology. Life had taught me that sometimes closure doesn't come in a conversation. Sometimes, it's in the decision not to answer the door when chaos comes knocking again. Mike swung by a few days later. He didn't say much, just handed me a brown paper bag with a six-pack and a bag of peanuts like we were back in our 20s again. We sat on the porch like we always did, two old men in lawn chairs, watching the neighborhood kids zip by on bikes they were too small to handle. So, he said, cracking a bottle open, how's it feel? How's what feel? I asked, though I already knew. Having your peace back. I leaned back in my chair and watched the sky. Feels quiet, I said, like something I forgot how to miss. He nodded, chewing a peanut. That's the thing about boundaries, Walt. They don't stop the storm. They just make sure you're not the one left mopping up the flood. I thought about that long after he left. About the years I spent trying to be the peacekeeper, the provider, the parent who never raised his voice even when his heart was breaking. I thought about how many times I'd let Elise step over my exhaustion, my grief, my limits, all because I thought that was love. But love without limits isn't devotion. It's erasure. That weekend, I drove past the old house one last time. Not to go in, just to see it. The Larsons had put up new shutters. Fresh paint. Janine was out front planting daisies, and Steve waved at me from the driveway with a wrench in one hand and grease on his face. I didn't stop, didn't roll down the window. I just nodded. A man nodding to the past and letting it stay there. Back home, I pinned that photo Elise sent me to the fridge with an old souvenir magnet from Helen's favorite diner. I looked at their faces, Helen's laugh frozen in time, Elise's cheeks dimpled with toddler joy. And let the warmth spread through me like whiskey on a cold night. I wasn't angry anymore. Just tired. Tired in a way that felt earned. Like finishing a job that took far too long, but knowing the foundation was finally solid. If Elise called tomorrow, I'd answer. But I wouldn't apologize. Wouldn't rewind the tape and pretend none of it happened. I'd listen. Maybe. But only if her voice came without entitlement. Because here's the truth no one tells you. Sometimes, loving your child means walking away from the version of them that keeps hurting you. It means accepting that the person you raised might grow into someone you don't recognize. And it means knowing, deep down, that your worth was never tied to how much you could endure. So I sat back in my chair, the porch creaking beneath me, and watched the sky bleed into evening. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything. Sometimes the most painful truth is this. Not every family bond deserves to be preserved. When someone you love crosses the line, the strongest move isn't revenge, it's reclaiming your peace. If you've had to walk away from someone you raised, share your story in the comments. Like this story and subscribe to this channel for more stories like this. You're not alone, and you're not wrong. See you soon in the next story.